And now we would like to move on with our third hearing on European Union border politics. And we have a video message first from Philip from Love 146. And second, we have a presentation of Kashef from Alarmphone about the cooperation with the European Union neighbouring countries despite human rights violations. And we are very excited to move on with that. And this will be also our last hearing for this day. We will give more information on what will come the next few days after the hearing happened. Thank you.
I'm Philip Ishola. I'm the CEO for Love 146 UK. We're an organisation that provides care and support to trafficked children, children unaccompanied and separated, and on the move across Europe. And indeed, we work in other parts of the world, specifically working with these vulnerable groups. Part of our initiative to support the Permanent People's Tribunal and to create an indictment of individual states or groups of states within a union to look at how and why the conflict between border protection, legislative frameworks, asylum systems that are developed, and that of the children's conventions, such as the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and also the various conventions in regard to trafficking, and in particular the Human Rights Act and indeed Human Rights Convention. And I say a conflict because there is a conflict between the two, and this dichotomy is explicit in how children are seen and treated, and this conflict has hugely detrimental impacts on the lives of children in a whole range of areas, including health. And when we talk about health, I specifically refer to the trauma that children have experienced, and indeed I would go as far as to say traumatising these children further in regard to how they are treated, seen as children, and indeed as young people up to the age of 18 and young adults post 18. Conflicts undermine the humanitarian conventions and indeed undermine state child protective legislation and mechanisms designed to protect all children that are within a member state's area of responsibility, or indeed within the area of responsibility of a union of member states, such as the European Union and the Council of Europe in that regard. And these children, who are inherently vulnerable within these migration routes, and in particular these trafficked children that are hidden further within these migration routes, and indeed in other routes that are employed by human traffickers and child traffickers in particular, are clear. They are vulnerable, and the responsibility that is incumbent on the state or group of states is also clear, as defined within the conventions, the multiple conventions, from Lanzarote to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and indeed the Human Trafficking Conventions. But it becomes clear when engaging with these children that their best interests, their rights, the duties that are incumbent on states are compromised. The conflict between immigration, border protection and asylum legislation and child protection conventions is clear, and the impact even more so in terms of how children are treated and their experience, which we see within the media and from personal stories and reports of children and their treatment across Europe within the migration route that they are sometimes forced to undertake, and indeed within the reception arrangements of multiple states across Europe, including the United Kingdom. A question arises: Is that compromise intentional or unintentional? We pose it is intentional and designed through the immigration, asylum, border protection mechanisms to prioritise those over the protection, needs and rights of children. With that being the case, we as an organisation, along with a range of organisations that we work with, partner with and consult with, are similarly minded that it is intentional, and that intention is manifest in how children are seen, treated as children, and indeed young adults. And this can manifest itself in many ways. The detention of children, the questioning of their age, which leads to detention and return to places of exploitation. The short-term reception arrangements with a view to pushing for the return of these children once they reach the age of majority, and indeed in some member states before they reach the age of majority, which is 18. That being the case, where children are returned within that framework, they are in all probability returned to places of exploitation. So culpable in terms of member states. When I mention conflict between legislation, I cannot see, as an individual, certainly as an organisation, any circumstances in which you would put children at risk in this context, or indeed any context. And the conventions that we have as individual states and groups of states ratified are there for that reason. So the non-compliance with those particular conventions have a immensely damaging and detrimental impact on the lives of children. And what I've expressed so far is really policy terms and policy language and conventions, and quite high level in terms of system and systematic responses at state level having an impact. But what I'd like to say at this point is, when we talk about this, these mechanisms and systems have an immediate impact on the lives of these children, and indeed long-lasting impacts where safety has not been provided, where treatment has been impactful on a child and young adult's mental health, from a whole range of different directions, all designed to perpetuate and prioritise the need to keep migration down. And I would pose at this point that there are no circumstances that would enable or facilitate any child to be put in that position, and the conventions that I referred to earlier on are there to ensure that that is not the case. So the case we put to the tribunal will reflect these particular concerns, and these concerns directly related to children, young people, and indeed young adults, 18 years and above. And I think it's important to emphasise this, that children are children as defined by the convention. However, the commitment that we give to these children as children, certainly reflected within the child protective and looked after framework within the UK, for example, where children are cared for and their future planned with them and for them for a safe future as young adults and into full adulthood, is crucial. As it currently stands, that refusal to put the needs of children and young people first as a priority in all instances, as is reflected within the Convention on the Rights of the Child, is immensely damaging, not only to those individual children, but to our values as states that purport to care for children, hence the creation of the conventions, to do no harm and to ensure that the most vulnerable are protected as reflected in the Human Rights Convention. Now, as an organisation, we have taken a clear stand, and we would like, and indeed will, put forward some recommendations in regard to how children are seen, treated by member states, by union of member states, by individuals, by departments, by ministries, by governments. And what we would propose is that there is responsibility and culpability in terms of the complicity in ensuring that the rights of these children are removed. And we have three clear recommendations. First relates specifically to children being seen as children first, their needs recognised first as children and foremost, and their rights and needs afforded them as a priority above all else. The second relates specifically to young people who transition the age of majority into young adulthood, and their rights and needs afforded them as a priority above all else. Complicity and culpability. Our third demand will focus specifically at holding those individuals, policymakers, departments, ministries, governments, union of governments to account for those actions that directly impact the rights of children and indeed harm those children. And where that is the case, the full weight of the law as defined within the humanitarian protection be brought to bear on these individuals. Across the spectrum, they must be held to account. I will conclude by saying, as it appears when you look across Europe and indeed the world, how human rights are sidelined, undermined, ignored, denigrated, we should be hugely concerned, because these rights are afforded to all as human beings, afforded to all children. They are immensely important. And those who are minded, for whatever reason, to dismantle or disregard those or to break those should be held accountable. Thank you for listening. My name is Philip Ishola of Love 146 UK. We wish you well.
Thank you for this. Thank you for this input from Philip. Now we have in-person input here in Rafigu, and it's from Mohammed al-Kashef from Alarmphone.
Hello, everyone. Hello, juries. Thanks for organizing the PPT in Berlin. And thank you for inviting me to talk about one of the most crucial topics of nowadays. Actually, I will speak about, as we heard the whole day on the different hearings, the problem that migrants and refugees in different European countries face. But actually, I want to just go back with time and place. Before people reach Europe, they have a long journey, one of the hardest journeys from Africa, Asia, to Europe. And today we will just go briefly through some points and case studies that show us how EU and Germany, specifically as an EU member state, has a big responsibility behind the idea of EU borders externalization and the huge role of developing the strategies. In the recent years, the German government has stood out as one of the few EU governments with a more welcoming approach to refugees. Alone in Europe, Germany accepted more than 1 million asylum seekers since 2015. The role Germany plays in EU border externalization, though, is in sharp contrast to its public image. There is no EU country more active than Germany in posting and militarizing border security in third countries. It pushes for military and security cooperation to stop migration and provides military and security equipment to a long list of African, Middle Eastern, and non-EU European nations. And unfortunately, that Chancellor Angela Merkel also argues for more arms transfer to African nations as part of development aid, because only where security is ensured can be safe. If we just go through different German rules in different African countries, we will see since 2014, even before, which called the Summer of Migration, before 2015, we will see the rule of German in Mauritania, where the construction of 3 border posts, equipment for 9 police officers, funding of 6 coaches to develop national training strategy focused on border security. In Niger, also construction of 9 police stations on the border with Nigeria, including equipment, vessels, motorcycles, and training model for border security, equipment for police forensic laboratory. In Chad, construction of border spot on the border with Cameroon, equipment and training planned. In Nigeria, more vessels to the Nigerian Immigration Service, and more development projects taking place. Germany's assistance for security projects in Africa dates from long before 2015. Since 2008, State Development Cooperation Agency GIZ has implemented on behalf of the German Federal Foreign Office the police program Africa in Niger, Nigeria, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Democratic Republic of Congo, Chad, Mauritania, and South Sudan. And after the Khartoum process and Valletta, this also program implemented in Egypt with Sudan, Tunisia, and other 22 African countries. The German government refused to disclose which German companies were contracted for this program and EUTF projects that related to the EU fund box. Tunisia is another reception of German assistance, receiving tens of millions of euros and donated or funded equipment and training, including radars, night vision equipment, and vessels. Together with the US government, Germany is helping Tunisia develop an electronic border surveillance system with the work carried by the American Defense Threat Reduction Agency. The Bundespolizei trains Tunisian border guards, for example, in the detection of foreign documents, and they also carry out joint measures in border control and maritime security. Other countries that received border security equipment donations from Germany include European, even EU countries such as Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Macedonia, as well as some in the Middle East, such as Lebanon, Egypt, and Sudan. Together with Luxembourg and the United States, Germany supported an OSCE project to strengthen border guard capacities in Turkmenistan, which included training courses and the donation of non-lethal paramilitary equipment and outfits. Germany donated even jeeps, cars, in 2011. Plus computer office equipment to the border police and immigration department in Gambia since 2012. It has supported Nigeria with the military equipment through the German Technical Advisory Group agreement. This includes material for border security, such as surveillance equipment and ground radar system. And in July 2017, Germany donated communication and maritime surveillance equipment to Benin in the context of ECOWAS Integrated Maritime Strategy for Zone E. Germany also donates military equipment for armed forces in recent years. It provided both Cameroon and Nigeria with military goods, including vessels and surveillance equipment for the fight against Boko Haram. In October 2016, on an African tour, Merkel pledged 10 million euros for communications equipment and vessels for Niger's army to strengthen its border security capacities. German former defense minister subsequently handed over 100 flatbed military trucks and over 115 motorcycles and satellite phones for use by army and police. All this aids, all this equipment, all this border security agreement have followed on each other at high speed as a refugee crisis emerged at the top of its political agenda, while the EU also works on migration agreements with countries in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, Middle East. It gives most attention to Africa. In November 2015, the Valletta Summit on Migration took place between the EU and 35 African nations, which produced an action plan, and it contains many measures to set up military, security cooperation, and assistance, including equipment provision. And everyone knows, and it's not a secret anymore, the EU-Turkey deal and how the German was a kind of the hidden engineer behind this plan, and it's resulted to the crisis of Moria that we all witness today. And from Turkey and Greece to Libya, also you can see how the German and the EU rule, and actually I'm talking about German precisely because this PPT is taking place in Berlin. So the German government is also responsible for what's going on in Libya and how they play an immediate role between different militias and how it's involved with Italy and France under the umbrella of EU to fund the militias and to feed the crisis in Libya, and then we complain about people crossing the sea, and we do the repression against the NGOs working in the rescue mission at the sea, the closure of the NGO and the criminalization and all what we see. But actually, this is all effect and a direct effect of the EU policies of Fortress Europe and closing the borders. The topic is so long, a lot of information, a lot of details. more than a decade, really, EU working harshly on this, and now we are living the consequences of these plans. I hope with my intervention that I just gave a brief and overview how Germany is really involved in doing all that. Thank you.
That was Mohammed al-Kashef from Alarmphone talking about the cooperation with the EU neighboring countries despite human rights violations. Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you, Philip, for your inputs. Philip's talked about smuggling, human trafficking, and the EU borders. Mohammed highlighted the impact of that on the current situation of refugees, including the miserable situation that people have in Moria, for example, and what's the responsibility of Germany behind that as engine of the Turkey-Europe deal, as well as the deal with the Libyan coast guards as well. Now, I would leave the floor for the jury to see if any of the jurors here in person and online have any questions for the participants who gave their input during the last hearing about the access of healthcare. Any questions?
Question, if I may?
Yeah, go ahead. Excuse me, Philip is still with us online, so you can also address him if you have a question to him.
Thank you. Just a follow-up on some of the points that were raised by Mohammed al-Kashef. How successful is this cooperation in terms of its ability to actually curb migration flows? So how much of it has made just the migration flows move more into the informal and the clandestine and just kind of sidestep this situation of further surveillance and further border security? I was wondering. And also you mentioned that there's a complete lack of transparency in terms of the role of the German companies in providing these trainings and being involved in these security practices. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit more of that, even if we don't have the raw data, what role are they playing in pushing forward this securitization agenda on the part of Germany? And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
The floor is yours, Mohammed, to answer.
Yeah, so actually when it comes to how this practice and behavior and agreements affect the migration flow, I would say that migration is a human nature. It's by nature since long time. If we want to measure it with success, so yeah, they are successful somehow. They decreased the numbers arriving to Europe, but didn't decrease the migration numbers in general at all. We see how many people are stuck in Libya, in Niger, in Turkey, even in Greece, in the islands, in south of Italy, in Spain. So the problem is still exist. It's not any way a solution. Why security and why militarizing the problem? Actually, because security become first, because politicians feel insecure when they handle migration file. There is a lot of money in the EU and different program in the member states just to fund what's called the third countries to develop and to implement different migration agendas, and it's going one by one in every, like actually, if you go through the study cases for different countries, you will see it's the same agenda, the same strategy, even with the same name of some national institutes that funded and supported by EU and the member states. And the role or the of the German companies, actually it's business, it's money, there is interest. And we know how it corrupted in Africa. Like nowadays in Nigeria, there is already a protest, there is a mobilization and movement going in the streets. Egypt was before, and unfortunately Germany and EU supported the coup in Egypt. And then in 2016, they were shaming how Egypt became a kind of migration gate, or like a back gate to Europe. And since then, there was a repression, they closed the Mediterranean. So somehow this strategy for the time being, for now, kind of successful, that people don't reach Europe, but at some point there will be an explosion, and no one will, or even never could stop the flow, the migration flow, because people actually flow with the wave. Even they say that, let's ride the wave to cross the sea. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed, for your answer. Is there any questions from the jury? Any other questions? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mohammed, for your insights and for drawing attention to the externalization of EU borders and what that involves. I have maybe more of an observation than a question, which has to do with really, while we're focused on migrants and refugees, I think what you pointed out, this kind of cooperation and kind of border enhancing capability support that cooperates with authoritarian regimes is not just targeting migrants or potential migrants, but is actually also targeting the populations in countries of the global south that are suffering under authoritarian regimes. And I think this is also important to take into account, that actually what the EU is doing is not just stopping migration, but actually supporting authoritarian governments in their repression of local populations.
Thank you for your comment and input. Do we have other comments or questions? Okay, we have one question. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Actually, again, is more than a question. It is a comment. It is a comment, if you wish. Thank you. I also thank you for putting focus on what we call the externalization of borders, in which Germany, but most of European countries, Italy, by the way, my country also was part of this. But you also pointed to something that is also important, and it is the huge amount of money, huge amount of profit that private firms in the field of security and control are really gaining out of this. I mean, the border control is becoming a huge business. It is a huge business in which not only governments, governments are spending money to control borders, are spending money to are distributing a lot of aid security, focus on security to countries, for instance, in Africa, as we have seen. But this is also benefiting a huge apparatus of private firms, an industrial apparatus of private firms that are really a huge stake in maintaining this policy of border control, or controlling borders, controlling people, etc. This is not a question, it's a comment, but I think it's something that we should always keep in mind and well, consider during the tribunal.
Thank you for your comment.